with you and your parents. If you have that, please hand it to me. I'll stand at the back as we release for small group, but we will need these handed in. For those mentors who have background check forms, we'll need to have those completed as soon as possible, so please make sure you get those background checks done. If you have them done, they can be placed in the office. Acolytes for this week. I don't have the 8 o'clock, but Noah has volunteered, so I know he's part of the 8 o'clock service. And then, oh, Noah, you're acolyting. And then we have Ellen and Jocelyn for the later service, and I know Jocelyn was looking for a sub. Jocelyn, did your dad find a sub? No. So if you plan to attend the 10 o'clock, actually Leah can do it for you. Her softball game isn't until 4 o'clock, so Leah, I volunteered you to do acolyting at 10. Jaden, you're at 8. All right, I think that's it.
So back on the board, if you can turn the lectern slider down so it doesn't interfere. We'll get Brenda talking loud into the mic, just not yet. So are you ready for another year of confirmation? Good. Tonight's going to be a little bit of an intro and a little bit of a review and an introduction to me. I was going to tell you something about me, and when Pastor Irmela does her first class, she'll share some about her background. I grew up in West Central Minnesota. I was in a family of 6. I had 2 older brothers and a younger sister, and my parents. I grew up on a farm. We had pigs, cows, chickens. I raised pheasants. I was in 4-H. My parents' church was very important, so I spent a lot of time at church growing up as well. It was in West Central Minnesota, about 13 miles from South Dakota, straight west of the cities. So I'm a farm boy, and I'm a pig farmer, and I know how to work with pigs. So if you have any questions, you can ask me about that. And at the time, we didn't even know it, but we were raising happy pigs. That's because we did it the old-fashioned way, and it was pretty hard. Then after I was an okay student in high school. I liked goofing around a lot at school. I was kind of surprised at one of my class reunions. They said I was the most fun to be around. And I think that was then. I'm a little less fun to be around now. But I grew fast in school when I was in 5th grade. I was 1 inch shorter than I am now. And between 5th and 12th grade, I gained 10 pounds. So I went from being about the biggest kid in class to just being mediocre size. And one of the reasons I say that is in 7th and 8th grade, you don't know how big and small you're going to be. You might not know until you're 19 or 20. So the body you have is the body God gave you, and don't worry if things at this moment aren't like you think they should be. You'll just keep changing anyway. So when I was in high school, I wasn't interested in college. I was going to go to a 2-year school, motorcycle mechanic, big equipment operator, or for farming. And then in the back of my mind, there was this idea of going to Bible school, because I thought it'd be interesting to be able to understand the Bible without having to become a pastor or anything like that. So I went to Bible school, and then I did end up going to college, and I did a short-term mission in Africa, in rural Africa, in Liberia, and I loved it. And I thought, I can't believe they pay people to do this. So after college, I went to California to study to be a missionary. I talked to some people. He said, hey, you better connect with a denomination. I grew up Lutheran, so I got certified to be a pastor and a missionary at the same time. When I was out there, I met my wife, Jill. We met in Pasadena, California, in a church in a Sunday school class. And the first social activity we did was a square dance in a church gymnasium. So be careful about dancing in church. That's all I can say. But we were married, and I think I'll go to our kids now. We have 2 kids, Kelly and Paul. Kelly's our oldest daughter, and Paul's our son. So they live in the cities. Kelly's a nurse. Paul works with Salvation Army. Their spouses have decent jobs. We have 2 grandkids, just got a second one this summer, and we've got one coming in another month or so. So we're excited about, one of the things about being old is you get to have grandkids. You know, I didn't want to become a pastor or anything like that when I was in high school. And after being a missionary, it was a close match. And we've served churches in South Dakota, in West Central Minnesota, Montevideo, and West Central Minnesota, Benson. We also did missionary work in rural Madagascar, which was totally a different world and very, very interesting. And we also went to the Middle East after 9/11 to be missionaries, to be a pastor in a big church in the Sultanate of Oman. Now, not many people probably know where that is. I have this map here. So this is where we were missionaries, close to Iran, close to Pakistan, close to India, close to Yemen, Saudi Arabia, and some of the other. It's a bit of a ways to Iraq. I think it's 1,000 miles. So when the Iraq War was on, we were pastors in the Middle East, and that was interesting, having discussions with people. We're going to look at this a bit later because a lot of things that happened in the Bible happened in the Middle East, and we'll look at some of that. So that's some things about myself. We've been here, Jill and I, for 10 years in Byron. Sometimes if it seems like I've been here a long time, maybe it's because I have been, but we enjoy Byron. And one of the things I really like about this church is there's more young families than most ELCA churches. And I know when I was in confirmation, I wasn't that excited about being in confirmation. But one of the big things for me that I want you to know is that the Bible is where you find the answers. And the most important thing in life is, who is God? Who are you? And how do you fit in to what God's up to in the world? And you know, when I was in high school, I thought church is boring. If God is like church, I want to do something fun. Well, that was wrong, because what God is up to is not boring. It's really exciting, and to be a part of it, I can't think of anything else better to do. So, is there any questions? Hobbies, I like riding motorcycle. I always have liked riding motorcycle. Like playing games. I was in sports in high school. I was a good football player. All the other sports I was so-so in. But I didn't take any of them very seriously. Part of the reason we did sports was so we didn't have to do chores at home. You know, if you got to run home and feed the pigs, you might as well play with your friends on the baseball field or something. So let's start with prayer. Lord, we thank you that you've gathered us here for this time, these 2 years in confirmation, where we look at your word, where we look at the Bible, and try to learn more about you And in the midst of learning about you, we learn about ourselves as well and who you made us to be. And I pray for the friendships here. I pray for the mentors, that together we would support and encourage each other as we try to understand more of you. We ask this in your name. Amen. So, we think we only have one person gone tonight, or it might be two. Do we know how many people aren't here? I don't think Abby Hamilton made it, and I think there's somebody else. So we will probably try to be live streaming, because at this point we don't know quarantines and all of that, and we'll try to do that. So this lecture should be on the internet, and if you miss the class, make sure you let your mentor know if you're not going to be here, because we do want to keep track of all of you, and make sure you let them know if you can't be here. So at this point, Tim, did you look on Edge in the history and see the cosmic eye anywhere? That's on the other computer. Okay. Yeah. Yep. So we tried something different on the live stream. You know, there's sometimes when you click start the live stream, sometimes YouTube has one more thing to hit go. It's like sometimes it makes you do it twice live stream. But so what that means is this is being recorded and we'll upload it to the internet afterwards, so it will be available. But it might not be live streamed tonight. So on the projection, can you find Cosmic Eye and then drag it from your computer over there and play it? Have you seen this before? Yeah, the second year saw it last year. you can cut it. As we do a review, in the Old Testament, God created the heavens and the earth, everything that existed. And I love that video because as awesome as creation is, God is way bigger than the universe. He's the one behind it all. He spoke and things happened. And he said it was good. He said it was very good. And then in the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve listened to the snake and they turned away from God. They didn't trust him, and sin entered the world, and brokenness and pain and trouble. And God said to the snake, there's someone coming from the line of Adam and Eve. You'll strike his heel and he'll crush your head. So from the very beginning, even though the ground was cursed and relationships fell apart, God said he was sending somebody. And then later in Genesis, we have what is the call of Abraham. And this cannot be underestimated when we think back of the old and start in the new. And I know the second year should know this, but it's a review. And the first years were coming in the New Testament, which is about the time Jesus was here. But God was working with his people, working with the descendants of Abraham for 1,500 years before Jesus came. And when we read through the Old Testament, the promise to Abraham and God's keeping his promise to Abraham is what really holds the whole Old Testament together. Everything else is details. It's about God's promise to him. He'll have offspring. God will make his name great. He'll have many, many descendants, even though he's old. And that through him, all of the families in the earth would be blessed. And I say that the first three were largely fulfilled in the Old Testament. When Jesus came, it was the last part of God's promise to Abraham when he says, through you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. Because in the Old Testament, the emphasis is on Abraham and his descendants. In the New Testament, it shifts to all the families of the earth because Christ died for everyone. He died for Abraham's descendants, but he died for the whole world. And God is gathering up. And the New Testament is a story starting with what God is doing in Jesus, and then it moves to what God is doing through the church, which the apostles say the church is the body of Christ, continuing God's mission in the world. So I think we have time. Tim, can you find the one that's Genesis 12 to 50? It should be in the history. Oh, he's got it. And then the last one will be New Testament overview. And we're going to go through 4 minutes of this, and then we're going to stop.
The book of Genesis. In the first video, we saw how chapters 1 through 11 set up the basic storyline of the Bible. God has created all things, and he makes humans in his image to rule the world on his behalf. The humans choose sin and rebellion, and so the world spins out of control into violence and death, all leading up to the rebellion and scattering of the people in Babylon. And so the big question is, what is God going to do to rescue and redeem his world? Well, out of that scattering at Babylon, the author traces a genealogy of just one family that leads eventually to a man named Abram, later known as Abraham. And God's promise to Abraham at the beginning of chapter 12 opens up a whole new movement in the story. God calls Abraham to leave his home and go to the land of Canaan, which God says will become his one day. And in that land, God promises to make Abraham into a great nation, to make his name great, and to bless him. Now, these promises are connected back to earlier parts of the book. So Babylon had arrogantly tried to make a great name for itself, and that didn't go over very well. But God, in his generosity, is going to bestow a great name on this no-name guy, Abraham. And God's blessing of Abraham echoes all the way back to that original blessing God gave humanity in the beginning. So the question is, why is God going to bless Abraham and his family? And the last line of God's promise makes this clear. So that all the families of the earth will find God's blessing in you. Now, this is key for understanding the whole rest of the biblical story. God's plan is to rescue and bless his rebellious world through Abraham's family. And this is why the whole rest of the Old Testament story is just going to focus on this one family, eventually called the people of Israel. This is also why Israel will later be called a kingdom of priests at Mount Sinai. God wants to use them to show all of the other nations what he's like. And ultimately, this is the promise that gets picked up by the later biblical prophets and poets who say that its fulfillment will come through Israel's messianic king, whose reign will bring justice and peace to all of the nations. Now, at this point of the story, none of that's clear. You just have to keep reading and watch the
You
promise
can stop it,
develop.
Tim.
And so the rest of the book focuses on
So the rest of Genesis focuses on Abraham's descendants and how God worked through them. And even though they messed up, God kept working through them. I had a Bible teacher once who said, it's not the Bible characters in the Bible who are the heroes. God is the hero because he works through ordinary people and people who mess up. And that's good news for us. You can get ready for the New Testament overview video. But before we do that, so between the Old and New Testament, does anybody know how long it was when the prophets stopped, when the Old Testament just kind of was finished?
the
being
New
written?
Testament. If you
Owen's probably been studying this. In between? Yeah. About 400 years. So God kept speaking to his people through the prophets. But then there was 400 years when we don't have anything in the Bible until the coming of Jesus. And in the New Testament, that's where we pick up. And it's very interesting if you turn to Matthew chapter 1, which is on page 989. It's probably 2/3 of the way through the Bible. Page 989. We can hear how Matthew starts out his gospel. Now, the Gospels are collections of Jesus' writings, who Jesus was, what he said, what he taught, the miracles he did, and then finally about his death and resurrection. That's the Gospels. Acts is after the Gospels. That's kind of a little bit of history on how the gospel spread all the way to Europe, where the really rowdy people lived. Back then, you know, the Middle East was civilized and Europe was considered uncivilized. But the gospel went all the way there. And then there's some, Paul's writings are called epistles. They're teaching letters for regular churches. So a lot of the New Testament is either sharing the story of Jesus or explaining to Christian communities following Jesus what was really important. So do I have a volunteer that can read? Maybe you can come up here and read. Max, you want to come up? Is that your hand? No, you're scratching your hair. Okay. No, somebody else. Come up. Thanks, Elsie. And you can start reading, and I'll stop you after a bit. But start with Matthew 1:1. And maybe stand over there by the microphone. Oh, here, I'll let you look at my book. I've got it open, right? Let's start there.
An account of genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham.
Ah, son of Abraham. Did we just hear about Abraham? Yeah. So when Matthew starts off, he's saying this is the family line of Jesus. And he's going way back, all the way to Abraham. So what does that mean between the Old and New Testament? The New Testament is the Old Testament continuing to tell the story on how God keeps his promise to Abraham. Now, you can read a few more until you're tired. There's a lot of them there, isn't it? There. A lot of names.
Abraham was the father of Isaac, and Isaac was the father of Jacob, and Jacob was the father of Judah and all his brothers. And Judah was the father of Perez and Sarah by Tamar, and Perez is the father of Hezron, and Hezron is the father of Aram, and Aram is the father of Amminadab, and Amminadab is the father of Nahshon.
That's probably far enough. Can you read back to me without looking at that, all those names in order? Yeah, I can't either. Thank you. But the genealogy shows Jesus is from the family of Abraham. And why does Matthew say that? Because what God is doing in Jesus goes all the way back to the beginning. It's all connected. Sometimes people have the idea of the Old Testament. That's hard to understand. It's not worth reading. The New Testament is about Jesus. Well, that is partly true, but the Old Testament, all the promises in the Old Testament, most of them are fulfilled in Jesus. Now, I want to show you this as well. This is the Middle East. This is Iraq. I just heard today that the Tigris River is down 70%, and there's 12 million people in danger of food insecurity from Syria and Iraq because this river is down. And that's given as where the Garden of Eden was, between the Tigris and the Euphrates. So this is where the Garden of Eden was. Abraham came out of Ur of the Chaldees, which I forget what's the modern town now. Could be Mosul, or it's around there. He went walking. God told him, leave, and I'll show you the place that I'm going to give you. Now, when Abraham left Ur the Chaldees, there was indoor copper plumbing in Iraq at that time. And he heads off in the desert not knowing where God is going to lead him. So he goes, him and Sarah, and they come down here and they end up settling around here. His descendants kind of settle in. There's a famine. All the descendants go to Egypt. They're there for a few centuries, and things get really bad. God delivers them from the Pharaoh. They come back into Israel. Now, Jesus was born in Bethlehem, which is the southern part, and then he grew up in northern Israel. And one of the things that's interesting in the New Testament is it makes a big difference where he is as to which people he's talking to and how much trouble he gets into. You know, when he was teaching way up in the northern part in the boondocks, he didn't get in as much trouble. But when he came down to the big city, Jerusalem, there was some pretty powerful people that really didn't like what he was saying. But this is all to show. And then, so the Old Testament starts here, goes there, comes here, comes back through there to there. They get captured by their enemies, Syria and Iraq, the Assyrians, the Babylonians. The Persians were mostly Iran. All these boundaries have changed over the last 5,000 years, believe it or not, 5,000 years. And this part of the world is in between Africa, Asia, and Europe. And when some empires got strong, they took it over. And it wasn't that people really wanted Israel, but they wanted this. This is kind of like growing up on an intersection in a tough part of a big city. There's maybe nothing special about the intersection, but different groups and gangs want to control it. So Israel was in a tough spot in terms of politics and power, but that's where God chose to be at work. And when you think about it, if God was going to come down somewhere in the world that was an intersection of all the big powers and people, this would be a good place to do it. Because in the New Testament, so the Old Testament is written over 1,500 years, and it's here. The New Testament is written in about 100 years, and it's really mostly in Israel. And then it's a story of when the church goes outside, and gospel goes all the way off the map to the ends of the earth. That's Europe. Thomas went to India, way over here. So in the New Testament, the Old Testament covered a lot of years and a lot of countries. The New Testament just really takes off. They go to Egypt, Mark goes to Egypt, Paul and Peter go to Rome, Thomas goes to India. A lot of people go where Turkey was. Where Turkey is, I guess I should say. So very interesting. Why don't you play the New Testament intro, and then we'll have some closing comments.
If you open up a Bible to its table of contents, you'll see it's made up of two large collections, the Old and New Testaments. The word testament refers to a covenant partnership, which is what both of these collections are all about. They tell one epic and complicated story of God's covenant partnership with Israel and all humanity. The Old Testament is called Tanakh in Jewish tradition. It's a unified scroll collection of 39 Israelite texts that were over 1,000 years in the making. In contrast, the 27 books of the New Testament all came into existence within 30 to 40 years of each other. They were all written by first-generation followers of Jesus. From an early period, Christian communities began collecting these texts and reading them alongside the Old Testament as one unified story that leads to Jesus. The New Testament begins with 4 narrative books that together are called the Gospel. They tell the story of Jesus of Nazareth's life, death, and resurrection as an announcement of good news. They're followed by a 5th narrative work called Acts of the Apostles. Here, the risen Jesus commissions the apostles, a word that means the sent ones. They're appointed as Jesus' representatives to spread the good news about him throughout the ancient world. After Acts comes a collection of letters from the apostles. These were written to provide teaching and guidance for local communities of Jesus' followers called churches. There are 13 letters connected to the Apostle Paul, and they're not arranged in the order of when they were written, but rather from the longest to the shortest. Then there's the letter to the Hebrews, written by a close but unnamed associate of the apostles. After this are the letters of James, Jude, Peter, and John. 2 were brothers of Jesus, and 2 were among his first followers. The last New Testament book is the Revelation, a letter to 7 churches that reveals a prophetic word of challenge and comfort to all of Jesus' followers. So those are the books of the New Testament, but what are they about? And how do they connect with the Old Testament to make up one unified story? Think of it this way. The Bible is one long epic narrative with multiple movements or acts. The Old Testament recounts the first series of acts that give you everything you need to make sense of the story to follow. The core themes and the plot conflict are arranged in design patterns. And then in the New Testament, these are all picked up and carried forward to the story's culmination in Jesus. Let me show you what I mean. The first act is about God and all humanity. God provides a sweet garden temple for humans who are made to be God's partners in ruling the world. But the humans are foolish, and they give in to a dark temptation and rebel against God's wisdom. So they're exiled into a wilderness where they start killing each other. They build cities that spread their selfishness and oppression, leading up to the big bad city of Babylon. But God loves the world and its foolish humans, so he sets in motion a rescue plan by promising the arrival of a new human who will destroy the evil that has lured us into self-destruction. The next act of the biblical story is about God and Israel, and it develops the themes and patterns of the first act. God calls a new humanity out of Babylon into a sweet garden land. Abraham, Sarah, and his descendants, the Israelites. God promises that through them, divine blessing will be restored to all of the nations. Surely these are the new humans that we're waiting for, but the Israelites repeat humanity's rebellion against God, building their own violent cities that lead to self-destruction and another exile in Babylon. But God sustains his promise that the new human will come from Abraham's lineage. It will be a priest king who will now have to rescue both Israel and humanity from Babylon to restore God's blessing to the world. Now, notice how these two acts are designed according to the same pattern. The second act is a longer and more violent version of the first, and together they explore the tragic human condition, but they also highlight God's promise, which is developed more in the next act, the Old Testament prophets and poets. The prophets accused Israel and all nations of their evil, and they announced that one day God himself would arrive to bring the day of the Lord and deliver his world from Babylon. He would do it through a promised royal priest who's going to suffer like a slave and die for the sins of Israel and all humanity, but then he'll be exalted as king over the nations. He will call others to leave Babylon and join the new covenant people who will partner with God to rule over a new Jerusalem, that is, over a new creation. And so the Old Testament concludes by anticipating a new act in the story. And when you turn to the New Testament, it's the same story, now being carried forward in Jesus. Let's see how. The four gospel accounts introduce Jesus of Nazareth, both as the promised son of Abraham who will restore God's blessing to the nations, and also as that new human who will defeat evil and restore humanity to partnership with God. So Jesus is portrayed as a human and more. He went about announcing the arrival of God's promised kingdom, and he spoke and acted as if he was Israel's divine king. But instead of calling himself king, Jesus referred to himself as the Son of Man, that is, the human one who would act like a servant. The Gospels are making the claim that in Jesus, Israel's God has become the faithful Israelite and the true human that we are all made to be but have failed to be. Jesus' mission was to confront that dark evil that lurks underneath humanity's evil, luring us into selfishness, violence, and death. But how do you defeat that kind of evil? The surprising answer in the Gospels is that Jesus overcame our evil by allowing it to kill him on his paradoxical throne, the cross, where Jesus died for humanity's evil and sin. And it's where he lived out what he taught, that nonviolence, forgiveness, and self-giving love are the most powerful things in the universe. And because God's love for his world is stronger than evil or death, Jesus was raised to new life as the prototype of a new humanity, and this brings us to the story of Acts. Through the Spirit, God empowers Jesus' followers to spread the life and love of Jesus out into the world as they invite people to leave their old humanity and join Jesus' multi-ethnic family, the new humanity. This is where the letters from the apostles fit into the story. Here, the apostles address early Christian communities, and they show how the good news about the risen King Jesus changed history and should reshape every part of our lives. They also explained the good news by constantly appealing to stories from the Old Testament and the stories of Jesus, showing us how to see our own life stories as part of the epic biblical story. So all humanity is trapped in a Babylonian exile, but Jesus came to create a new home. We're all living in different kinds of Egyptian slavery to selfishness and sin, but Jesus died as the Passover lamb to liberate us into the promised land. Our old humanity is bound for the dust of death, but Jesus' resurrection opened up a new future for a new humanity. We live here in the current evil age, but through Jesus and the Spirit, a new creation has burst open here and now. And this leads us to the book of Revelation, where the whole biblical story comes together in powerful symbolism and imagery. Jesus is portrayed as a slaughtered, bloody lamb who is exalted as the divine king of the world. He's leading his people out of slavery and exile in Babylon. And as they resist Babylon's influence, they may have to suffer alongside their slain leader. But when you follow the risen king, not even death can prevent the dawn of the new creation, which is here depicted as a new Jerusalem garden temple, the true home of humanity after its long exile. And so on the Bible's last page, heaven and earth are reunited, and the new humans take up their appointed task from the Bible's first page, to rule the world together in the love and power of God. The New Testament is a remarkable collection of documents. They represent the testimony of the apostles that points us to the risen Jesus himself. And through God's Spirit, these human words have been speaking a divine word of hope from the first century to the 21st. Each book shows how God, through Jesus and the Spirit, is leading our world to its ultimate goal in a renewed creation. And so the story's end is really the beginning of a new story that is yet to be told. And that's what the New Testament is all about.
Okay, did you catch all that? It's okay if you didn't. It's to help you start on the right path. So I'm going to finish here. You have some announcements. For the mentors, you didn't have a lot of material with your youth tonight. I'm thinking you'll get to know each other, catch up on what happened this summer. That's good. Okay.
All right, how's this? Okay. So the seventh graders, we have broken you into your mentor groups, and so all of the boys, you are going to be with Stephanie and Diane, which shouldn't be a surprise, but all of the boys will be separated that way. One group will be with Tim Meek and Emily Hamilton. Emily's not here tonight. And that group will be Lily Brooks, Sophia Busing, Cora Esser, Lexi Gertz, Abby Hamilton, Cece Meek, and Taylor S. So that will be one group. So as you leave, you'll want to catch up with them. The other group